They said it was just a myth, the story of a girl buried alive beneath the city, left with nothing but a lamp and a loaf of bread. But it wasn't a myth, it was law. In ancient Rome, purity wasn't a virtue, it was a weapon, and those who failed to uphold it, even in silence, were erased, not by sword or fire but by stone, sealed chambers, and ritual obedience. This is the story of Cassia, a girl chosen to serve the gods, and condemned by the very vow that was meant to save her. The city did not sleep the night before the selection. Smoke rose from sacred fires, bells rang across the temples, and mothers clutched their daughters tighter than usual, as if holding them back might make them invisible. Cassia stood still as her mother tightened the linen over her chest, binding her body flat so she would look younger, untouched. She was 13, but in Rome, that was old enough to be useful, holy, or ruined. Outside their door, a procession of priests marched barefoot in silence, each holding a ceremonial staff tipped with gold. When they knocked, her father opened the door without looking back. He didn't say goodbye. No one did. The choice had already been made, and not by the gods. The moment Cassia stepped outside, the women began weeping behind closed shutters, not for her soul, but for what she would no longer be allowed to become. The house of the Vestals was larger than she imagined. Pale marble, columns that reached the sky, and a fire that never slept. She expected holiness. She found silence. The other girls didn't speak to her. They only watched. One girl, maybe 15, dragged a sharp comb through Cassia's hair and muttered prayers not found in any scripture. Another took her clothes. Her new robe was white, thin, and stitched with the symbol of Vesta, just below the collar, 3 flames in a circle, a vow made visible. That night, Cassia was taken to a stone room with no windows and told to kneel. An elder Vestal pressed 2 fingers to her lips, then to her eyes, then to her chest. "This is the first silence," she whispered. "If you cannot carry it, it will carry you." Then she was left alone. The floor was cold. The walls were colder. She tried to sleep, but the silence felt too loud, as if something was moving beneath it. The torch in the corner hissed and dimmed. Somewhere down the hall, she thought she heard soft feet and a whisper. Not words, just breath. Cassia held her knees to her chest and stayed awake until the torch burned out. No one came to relight it. No one came for her at all. By morning, she was different. Not because she had been chosen, but because she had not been allowed to leave. They gathered her hair in a single braid, the color of ash, and cut it while she slept. Cassia woke to the weight of it gone, strands scattered beside her like wilted offerings. When she touched her head, she felt the uneven stubble, the cold press of air against her bare neck. A sign, they said. A signal to the gods that she now belonged to no one, not a father, not a husband, not herself. At dawn, she was led barefoot across the courtyard stones, her soul still tender from the night spent kneeling. The sky above Rome was painted in bloodlight, and the Vestal temple loomed over her like a waiting tomb. Inside, the Pontifex, Maximus, stood draped in red and gold. His eyes never met hers. He recited the words from memory, not devotion, as if this moment had happened so many times it had become a kind of sleep. She repeated the vow, her voice dry and shaking, promising 30 years of chastity, silence, and service to the eternal flame. But the real ritual began after. Behind a veiled curtain, in a room not found on any official scroll, Cassia was laid upon a slab of dark stone. Elder Vestals circled her, murmuring something older than Latin, older than law. Her robe was opened to expose her chest, and they smeared her skin with a mixture of wine and ash. Then they poured warm oil over her lips, not to bless her, but to seal her. "Your words now belong to the flame," one of them said, brushing a hot iron just near her mouth, close enough that she flinched. Let nothing else escape. Her tongue burned, though it was never touched. Her body trembled, though they did not restrain her. One whispered in her ear, "Many survived the vow, fewer survived the silence." Afterward, she was not escorted back to the sleeping quarters, but locked in a chamber with a narrow slot in the door, through which someone passed her a cup of water and a strip of salted bread. She was not to speak for 7 days, not to pray aloud, not to weep, A single sound, even a cough, would mark her unfit. The others watched through the slit. She could feel them waiting for her to break, but she didn't, not when the shadows moved like figures across the far wall, not when she swore she heard a voice call her name in the dark, and not when she found a single tooth placed in the corner of the chamber, still warm, as if it had been left moments before. Cassia pressed the bread to her lips and swallowed dry. Her silence was her armor now, but already it felt like a cage. The door opened on the 7th night, but no one entered. Cassia had not spoken, not once. She had not wept, not even when the dark began to whisper things she knew were not hers. She stood slowly, her legs stiff, her mouth dry, her thoughts thin and stretched. Outside the chamber, a single Vestal waited older, with hair white as the walls and skin lined like cracked marble. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked, and Cassia followed. The corridor was unfamiliar, deeper, narrower. The oil lamps flickered low, casting long shadows that moved wrong against the walls. They passed statues with missing eyes, doors carved shut, stairs that sloped in uneven spirals. Finally, they reached a room with no torch, no altar, no light at all except a single lantern on the floor. Inside were 3 women. Their robes were older, yellower with age, and the hems of their sleeves were soaked with something dark. One of them lifted the lantern. "Step forward," she said. This is the first silence. Cassia opened her mouth to ask what that meant, but the words never came. The women reached for her without force, and she let them. Her robe was removed, her arms held open, a soft cloth was placed over her eyes, and the air filled with something bitter herbs burning, or maybe teeth. The floor beneath her was warm, almost pulsing. One woman whispered a name that was not hers into her ear. Another held her face and said, "If you ever break your vow, this moment will return to you." And then came the heat between her legs, beneath her ribs, across her lips. Something was poured onto her skin, thick and warm and scented with myrrh and blood. It soaked into her navel, her chest, her throat. She was not being purified. She was being claimed. They said nothing else. They did not bless her. They did not pray. They simply performed. When it was done, the blindfold was lifted. The 3 women were already gone. The lantern was nearly out. In the corner, something hung from the ceiling, a white linen sash, twisted tight like a noose. Cassia looked down and saw her own feet, red with streaks of oil and ash, toes curled slightly inward. She picked up her robe, now folded neatly on the floor, and put it back on without question. There were no witnesses. No scroll would record this rite. It was the ritual they never wrote down, the one too old for law but too sacred to stop. When Cassia was led back into the main hall, the other girls did not meet her eyes. They only stepped aside as if something had changed, and it had. She no longer felt like a girl preparing to serve. She felt like something buried, not yet dead. The flame was never supposed to die. That was the law, not divine, but imperial. The fire of Vesta was more than symbol. It was state, empire, control. Cassia learned quickly that the punishment for letting it falter was not spiritual shame. It was the lash. Not from the priests, but from the elder Vestals themselves, whose hands were steady, eyes cold, and mercy absent. They told her the flame was the soul of Rome. If it died, the empire would rot. So she sat beside it, hour after hour, feeding it wood in measured pieces, whispering breath to keep it alive. But no one warned her what came with the flame. At night, it flickered strange. Once, as she drifted into shallow sleep, it dimmed without wind, and in the sudden hush that followed, she heard it. A footstep, soft, careful, just beyond the curtain, then a second, then breath. Close, too close. She turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the fire, low and sullen, casting shadows that swayed like they had weight. She tried to ignore it, but the next night, it happened again, and the next. On the 4th night, the fire flared suddenly as if in warning, and a whisper reached her ear. Not a voice, just a sound, like someone trying not to speak. Her mouth went dry. She told the elder Vestals, choosing her words with care, "I think I hear something near the flame at night. They said nothing. Only one of them tilted her head, the way someone might look at a child who wandered too close to the edge of a cliff. Later, Cassia found her sleeping mat moved to the opposite side of the chamber. No one admitted to it. But that night, as she returned to the fire, she found a small object beside the basin, a ring, burned black. Inside the band was a name, not hers, Livia. A girl who had taken her oath a generation earlier, a girl who, according to the records, had served 30 years and died peacefully. Cassia returned the ring to the altar, unsure whether it was offering or warning. She did not sleep. She barely blinked. But still, the fire dimmed once more, and with it, the breathing returned. This time, closer. She spun and caught sight of a figure behind the curtain, white robe, blackened hands, no eyes. Then it was gone. The flame flared again, steady and cruel. Cassia did not speak of it again. From that day forward, she burned the wood early, kept her lips closed tight, and watched the fire like it might betray her. Because she understood now the flame was not alone in the room, and it remembered every girl who had let it die. It happened on a market day, when the city below the temple was loud with trade and wine and dust. A visiting priest had come to offer tribute, his garments embroidered with laurels and his voice too warm, too curious. He asked Cassia if the silence weighed heavy on the young. She should have bowed and stepped away. Instead, she said softly, "It's not the silence that's heavy, it's the breathing." The priest paused. His smile did not fade, but it changed, curled at the edges like something folding in on itself. He touched her shoulder once, gently. "They never liked the quiet, at first," he said. "That night, they came for her. The elder Vestals did not speak. They took her by the arms and walked her barefoot through the hallways, past the sacred chambers, deeper than she had ever gone. She did not fight them. One of them held scissors, another held a bowl. Cassia's hair had already been cut once, but this time they shaved it down to skin. As it fell, the woman beside her muttered words in a language Cassia didn't know, syllables thick and clotted, like something from under the earth. The bowl caught her hair. Then they took the white robe she had worn since her first night and replaced it with a new one, stiffer, heavier, with stitching across the chest that itched like thorns. It was not punishment, it was preparation. "You're not unclean," one whispered, "but you are loud, and the earth prefers the quiet." They did not explain further. But the way they moved, the way they didn't look her in the eyes, told her what the silence could not. She had been marked. She was no longer one of them. Not truly. And she still bled. That mattered more than anything. Back in her cell, Cassia tried to pray, but the words didn't come. She bit her tongue to feel something real. Blood filled her mouth, warm and metallic, and she held it there before swallowing. Later that night, she found something placed beneath her bedding. A thin bone, carved with the same 3 flame symbol she wore over her heart, but it was broken, split down the center as if snapped by a hand far stronger than hers. She carried it in her palm until morning. No one asked about it. No one cared. The others avoided her now, their footsteps soft, their eyes lowered. One girl crossed herself when they passed in the corridor. Cassia was not afraid. She was angry, not for what they did, but for how they smiled through it. For how the priest had touched her like she was already buried, and for how, even now, she could still hear the breathing behind the flame, except now it knew her name. They came at dawn, not in secret but in ritual. The courtyard had been swept clean, the flame had been fed, and in the still blue morning, Cassia was brought to the tribunal room beneath the temple where judgment was passed without trial and guilt was decided in silence. The Pontifex Maximus stood at the far end, his robes dragging like roots behind him. Cassia had seen him before, from afar, when she first took her vow. Now she stood directly before him, barefoot on the cold stone, her hands bound not with rope but with a thin red thread wound too tightly around her wrists. It was ceremonial, they said, but it bit like punishment. No one spoke her name, no charges were read, only the law was recited, in the same tone one might use to read weather. Any Vestal who allows impurity to touch her shall be buried alive, that the gods may be appeased, and the flame remain eternal. Cassia stood still. Her lips did not part. She looked at the high priest and wondered if he remembered her voice, if he remembered how she had spoken to him once, too boldly, on a day when the sun was too loud. She watched as he blinked slowly, then nodded. That was the verdict. That was all it took. The elder Vestals did not cry. They did not even look ashamed. One of them approached and removed the red thread from her wrists. Another placed a coin in her palm, not for passage, but for silence, as if they were paying her to go quietly into the earth. She was led down a long corridor, deeper than any place she had ever walked, until the air grew damp and the stones beneath her feet no longer echoed. The room at the end was small and made of earth-packed walls. A single grave had been dug into the floor, shallow, ready. In the center of the chamber was a wooden stool, a loaf of bread, a clay jug of milk, and a small oil lamp. Nothing more. This was not exile. It was performance, a ritual the city above would never see, but one the gods demanded be done exactly. They called it mercy, this ritual burial. They said it allowed the girl to live long enough to not be murdered, but all it meant was slower death, a death with time to think. Cassia was not pushed. She stepped into the chamber on her own. When the stone was rolled over the door, the last thing she heard was a prayer offered by the priest outside. His voice was calm, practiced, distant. When the silence returned, she breathed it in like smoke. The flame was gone. The breathing had followed her here, and now it waited for her to speak first. There was no air in the tomb, only breath not hers. The chamber was barely tall enough to stand in, and the walls sweated as if the earth itself mourned. Cassia sat on the stool they had left for her, holding the oil lamp in her lap, watching its small flame flicker like it knew it was the last. The bread lay untouched beside her. The milk had already gone sour. No one had spoken to her since the stone sealed her in, but she was not alone. The breathing returned on the first night. Faint at first, like someone asleep a few steps away, then closer, then behind her. She turned too quickly and spilled the lamp oil across the dirt floor. She caught the flame just in time, cupping it in shaking hands, whispering to it like it was the only god that still listened. She did not sleep. Her thoughts came in pieces now, soft and wrong. She remembered her mother's hands binding her chest. She remembered the cloth soaked with ash between her legs. She remembered the figure behind the flame, mouth open, eyes missing. But worse than any of that was the silence between breaths. It felt like something waiting to be let in. On the second day, she found markings carved into the earth wall, thin scratches, uneven. Not words, just a single repeated line, drawn again and again, a circle of 3 flames, sometimes whole, sometimes crossed out, sometimes split down the middle, as if broken deliberately. She traced one with her finger and felt a jolt behind her eyes, like falling. The air pulsed. Something whispered her name not with breath, but with the memory of breath. That night, she did not light the lamp. She wanted to see it, whatever it was. She sat in the dark and waited. It came in pieces. First the outline of white fabric, then the sound of nails dragging softly through soil, then the voice hers, repeating the vow in her own cadence, but slightly wrong, like a mirror left too long in the Sunday. I serve the flame. I speak no want. I carry the silence until I am buried by it, over and over. And then laughter, a girl's, choked and broken, trying to sound innocent. Cassia pressed the red thread still wrapped around her wrist to her lips. It smelled of rust and oil. She bit it, hard enough to bleed. The figure vanished, but the silence did not return. Something in the room had changed. The flame inside the lamp had died, but the walls were glowing faintly now, as if they remembered light or hungered for it. Cassia moved the stool to the far corner and sat with her back to the dirt, arms wrapped tight around her knees. She began to hum, softly, a song she did not know. The breathing returned closer this time, and it hummed with her. The chamber was not meant to be opened. That was the promise, the law, the ritual. But centuries later, long after the names of the Vestals had faded from stone, and the fire of Vesta was declared extinguished by decree, someone pried the seal loose beneath the forum. It was an excavation, they claimed, an accident. The scholars who descended through the broken floor found the tomb intact. The walls were black with soot and claw marks. The grave had been dug deeper, as if the girl inside had kept digging even after the air ran out. And at the far end of the room sat the stool, overturned, beside the outline of a body curled in the dust. No bones, no skin. Just a shape pressed into the floor as if memory itself had weight. In her place was a ring burned black, the name within it almost too faded to read. Almost. The scholars argued over whether this was Cassia. Some claimed she never existed, that the burial of Vestals was symbolic, but the scratch marks on the walls told a different story. So did the teeth, 17 of them, shattered, found scattered near the grave, as if someone had tried to bite through the silence. They studied the symbols carved into the stone, circles with flames, circles split open, circles crossed out in red. One historian fell ill shortly after and refused to return to the site. He said the dirt still breathed, that he heard humming from the walls, that the silence beneath the earth felt like it was watching. Others mocked him, but the site was sealed again within the month, quietly, without ceremony. What frightened them most wasn't the evidence of death, it was the evidence of ritual. The law had not been myth, the burial had not been metaphor. For centuries, Rome fed its daughters to the silence, not for sin, but for discipline, for control, for order, and they wrote it down like scripture. Cassia's name never appeared in the official scrolls, but the chamber still exists. So do the marks. So does the flame. Some say, though it no longer burns in temples, it flickers in dark rooms, behind closed doors, in moments when the breathing you hear is not your own. Some say the ritual never truly ended, that it lives now in different forms, in systems, in silence, in what is done to women behind walls and called tradition. Somewhere in the dark, a girl in white still waits not to be saved, but to be remembered. Her vow was silence, but her story, buried in law and stone, now speaks for itself, loudly, clearly, and it does not ask permission. If stories like this haunt your thoughts long after the screen goes dark, like, subscribe, and share Forgotten Stories' Ancient World.